Hello, and in this tutorial we're going to look at conditional statements and developing UI. So what is a conditional statement? In computer science, conditional statements, conditional expressions, and conditional constructs are features of a programming language which perform different computations or actions depending on whether a programmer specifies Boolean condition evaluates to true or false. Boolean simply means a true or false variable. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. And condition simply means, a condition statement means a question. So let's move this out of the way and let's look at this practically. I'm just delete that. Right here represents the same thing. This right here is a flow chart that represents the logic of your application, of your program. I'm in PowerPoint right now, so we're just looking at the logic here. If something, we ask a question here, so this is a question mark. Is this variable true? Does this statement come out to be true, or does this statement come out to be false? In programming, if the statement comes out to be true, then this happens over here and the rest of the code runs. If it's false, then this happens over here, like this code happens over here, and then it runs. Here's another view of the exact same thing. And this is how it's presented a lot of times when people want to visualize what's happening with their code logic. Right here it says A equals true. If A equals true, then B, else C, end if. So this can be confusing to people who don't understand a little bit about code. And even if you do sometimes when you're first starting, this could be a little bit confusing, but understand it the same way as this. This is the program goes into this question. And it says, is A true or is A false? If it is true, it does this code. If it's false, it does this code. And then it continues, or exit, or whatever you wanted it to do. This will make more sense if we look at it in terms of programming. However, before we go into looking at it in terms of programming, this is what we will be using in our program. However, what we want to now be able to do is be able to understand how our program will look. We know the code, we know the logic we'll be using, and now let's look at how our UI will look. And the UI simply means user interface. How do we want our user interface to look? So here I'm just going to go here, insert, and you can do this a lot of times. Even if you don't know PowerPoint, just select some shapes and start adding shapes to personify how you want your application to look. I'm going to make this my window. And then I'm going to grab another box and change that color. Oh, that's this box color. I'm going to add another one, change that color. And I'm going to add an input box here. And I'm going to add another one here. And so if the person inputs something here, then it'll give them a message, let's say down here. And then I'm going to want a button maybe down here that they press, and this could change. And this will be, I think I also want, yeah, this will be message, and this will be my output. Pretty simple application, and once we get there we might add a little bit more. You can change the color of this if you want to make it more presentable. And so what we'll end up doing, and just to make sure I understand that this is the output, I will change this form here, the style and everything. We don't want to spend too much time on this, but you get the idea. You can share this with a team member and they understand how the interface is supposed to look. Now the next thing we want to do is start labeling these. So here I want to label this BTN. This is going to be a button. So I want to make sure this is BTN. I'm sorry, this is not a button. This is a text box. TXT message. So you see how I put that prefix there, TXT. This is a way of labeling things in object-oriented programming. TXT simply means text box. So instead of me saying text box in the name, we simply say TXT. And you notice I started off lowercase, and then every other word will be capitalized first, and then the rest of the word. This is called camel casing. And so this is called TXT message. Camel casing makes it easier for other programmers to read your code. So this is why you want to understand how to how to name and label your message boxes and your text boxes. Now this is also probably going to be a text box. So I'll put txt output. And a text box takes in text, like someone needs to type some information in there. And so really, I don't need this to be a text box. I don't need people typing anything in here. Maybe what I want this to be is a label. So I'm going to say LBL. So that's label output. And this is going to be the name of it. And I can remove this so no one's confused to think that those 3 dots go with the name of that. This right here is a button. It will be called enter, but I'm going to put BTN enter. Now let's go ahead and take this and convert this into our Visual Studio. So here I'm going to open up Visual Studio. So once Visual Studio is open, I can create a new project. I want to go here to change this to Visual Basic down here. I'm going to go to the window, and I'm not going to make a. So I'm not making a console window or anything. I want to make a Windows application. I don't want it to be console window though. What we want to be able to use is UWP. And this Universal Windows Platform will work on all Windows projects, including phones. This automatically has WPF in there. So this is what we want to be able to use. I'm going to select that and click Next. Then we want to name this. Name it whatever you want. UI. I'm maybe name it UI and Conditionals. I don't like spaces in between there, so I'll just put a dash there. Make sure you save it. So select where you want to save it and save it there. And remember that and click Create. So it's asking what our minimum, our target is for our UWP. We want Windows 10. Click OK. Unless you don't, you can change that. Now, when you're in Windows 10, this is going to open up and it's going to ask install apps from any source, including loose files. Because we're developing a UWP, we're going to want this on, and it's going to warn us, but we want this on because we're going to be developing an app. So we'll go ahead and just close that. And now we'll go, not build your app, but you can get information on what UWP is, and you can learn more about it. And you can even get some samples here. So I'm just going to expand this here. And we'll see our UWP app here. We see our main page, and then we see our app.xaml. So I'm just going to double click on this main page. Once this main page is open, if I click down here, I'll see my code down here, and this is my UI interface. So in this user interface area, what we can do is go here and copy what we have here. We have a text box and a label and a button. So I want to go over here to my toolbox to the left. I want to make sure that that's pinned by clicking on that pin button right there. And then I can double click this button, or I can drag a button over here. When I drag the button, as you can see, it comes over here. And the other thing you want to be aware of, because we're dealing with UWP, is that this XAML area down here is created. Now, we're not going to go too deep into XAML, but understand that the XAML represents what you see here. If you mess with the XAML too much and you make a mistake, and let's say I mistype this, what'll happen is this will give you this error because it doesn't understand what this is, doesn't understand the XAML. So you want to make sure that the XAML is written properly. You don't currently, right now, you don't have to worry about the XAML. You just have to know what it is. And basically, it is representative of what you see here, almost like a website. Behind every website, there's HTML. And behind every Universal Windows project, there is XAML. So we have this button here. Okay. And we have our XAML button here. If I were to select this code here in XAML and paste another one in XAML, you'll see now I have two buttons. So that will show you that whatever is written in the XAML is also presented up here. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button. And once I click this button, I'm going to follow a particular protocol before I add anything else over here. If I hold down the control key and the middle mouse button, if I scroll, I can zoom in and out. I'm going to first select this button. I'm going to go over here to the properties panel. And if you don't see the properties panel, see over here, we don't see the properties panel. If you don't see the properties panel, you can go here to Windows, and then you can go reset window layout. This will reset it to factory default, and then your properties panel will show up here. Okay. So with this button selected, I'm first going to name this button just like what we had here. So I'm starting off with a button that's called BTN Enter. I'm going to select that button, go here, BTN Enter. And now we have that name for the button. That name for the button is specifically there so I can access it in code. Now, this is not code, this is XAML. Our code is right underneath this main page, right inside of this XAML page that says .vb. That's where all our code would be, okay? So we're not there yet, but for right now, understand that's why we need the proper naming for this. And we don't want this label here to be called button, but there's a couple of ways we can change this. We're going to do it the hard way first, because it's important that you understand that the properties only shows what you have selected. So watch me select this window. Select this window. And you see it says grid, meaning this is what's selected, this grid down here. If I were to go up here and select page, I select that page, you'll see it says type page. That's what's selected. If I select this button, you'll see type button, and we gave it a name, and that's what's selected. So when that is selected and we have our properties here, we can change the properties of this button. For instance, I can go here to brush, and I can change the background. So I'm going to select, see, whatever's blue here, that's what's selected. So I'm going to change that background color. And if you look up there, the background color is changing. And I want to change the foreground, which is the words, right, the text. I can go here, select that foreground, and change that to whatever I want. Something interesting. Then I can go down here. So I'm going to close the brush so I'm not confused, right? I'm going to go here to text. Now I can change the text by clicking on this and choosing, oh, look at that alien text. And then I can make this a little bit bigger. And I can even make it even bigger than that. If you want it bigger than 72, you just type it in there, 100. Right? That's huge. So you see, it's already looking different than what we had in our UI, our prototype. So that's our button. And now another element I want to change is the content. So see this content area? I can go here and I'm going to say press. Or how about enter? What do we call this? We call this BTN enter. Okay, so I'm just going to call it enter. I'm going to put enter there so people can know to enter that. Now, what's the next thing we have? The next thing we have is a text box where you can put stuff in, and then a label where you bring things out. I'm going to follow the same protocol. First, go over here to Tools, tab. I'm going to pin the Tool tab down here. We're going to take this text box here, and we're going to drag it over here. And we're just going to resize this text box to what we want. And then we're going to go and make sure that it's read only. So we select that read only right there. All right. And then we can drag that down a little bit. And then we can change the text whichever way we want, the same way we did before. So I'm going to select this label. And then the first thing I need to do is change the name, LBL, what output. I think that's what we called it. And we can just check here. Yep, LBL output. And then we can change the text in there. The text, I'm going to change it to the alien. And I'm going to change the size to something like that. Good. And I'm not really worried about that word text box in there. But if I didn't want that in there, go to common and then go to text and then change that. So I'll just put something like 3 dots. So as I'm dragging this, you'll notice that it is aligning two different elements there. Watch, it turns red when it's aligned to this, and then it turns red when it's aligned this way. So that's how you can align things immediately. So now that I have this text box here, but we change it to a label basically, we can go ahead and add another one. Now instead of adding another one here, I'm going to use my knowledge of XAML to create this text box. So I'm going to go here and use my knowledge of XAML to highlight this text box here. I'm going to copy it and then I'm going to paste it. The reason why I did that, because I already set everything up the way I wanted it to be. So the look of it and everything, it's already set up. So now all I need to do is change the name of that. So you'll notice I get this error. I get this error because two of the same type of items have the same name. So I just have to change this name in my XAML right here to LBL text. I think we named that input. Yes. And that's not an LBL, that's a TXT message. So I'm going to call that TXT message. So now we have that TXT message, and I could just grab that message and bring it up. And now you see the advantage of knowing a little bit about XAML and not knowing about XAML, because we would have had to do it all over again. And if this is confusing to you, just do it from scratch all over again. It's fine. All right, so now all I have to do is change this these dots in here, and I can go here into the comment under the text and just remove those dots there. And also, I don't want this to be read only, because this is where people are going to input their information. Now, in here, I can do placeholder text. Please enter a command. So that's the placeholder text. I can bring this up a little bit right there. And this right here is going to be, this is where we're going to put our information. So now we were able to successfully go here, know how our logic is going to be, and then create our user interface. Then from there, we created it inside of Visual Basic, Visual Studio using Visual Basic. Now we need to save this, because you see this little dot here, it means it's not saved. So I'm just going to hit Control S to save this, and then I'm going to hit local machine and run this. So after everything's done loading, this is what we get. See, right now we can enter stuff in there, but we can't enter anything in here because it's not meant to be. And we have this button here that does absolutely nothing. Great. All right, now let's go ahead and add the logic to our user interface. So with every universal Windows app and every VB application you run that's using WPF or Universal Windows app or anything like that, any modern application, you'll have your interface, you'll have your XAML, then we have the code behind where we put our brains behind the application. So if I click on here, this represents my main window. So a lot of times when you start Visual Studio, you start a new project, this will be blank because it doesn't know what you want to be open. So what you need to do is go here to the main page and double click on this, and it'll open up this window. But now what we want to do is look at the code. So we're going to double click on that, and then it'll open up the code over here. This code right here is boilerplate. It must be run. Leave it as it is. We want the code inside of here. Now, we could start typing up our code and writing up for the button and all that sort of stuff. But there's an easier way to do this instead of us typing it directly. So every time you click on something over here or one of these windows, it opens up a tab. So we already had the main window, the main page tab open. So we'll see it right here. We can click on that tab to go back and forth. So we want to, when we click on the button, for something to happen. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the edge of this button and double click very quickly. And if you notice, what it did was it wrote this code for us, and it called it btn enter underscore click, which is perfect because this means that this function or procedure is going to run our code inside of this procedure. So we have the opening part of the procedure and the close part of the procedure. We got to make sure that we write our code in between these two. You cannot write your code out here, you would get an error. So just between these two, we write the code. The other thing we want to be aware of, it says handles btn.click. That means that this function or procedure will handle anytime this name is clicked. That's why we had to name it in the beginning. This is why the name is so important. So this right here connects it directly to that button. All right. So now all we need to do is go in here and type our code. Now we have the names for all these things, and now we're going to get into understanding how to develop our conditionals. And a conditional is simply a question. The first thing we need is a variable to check out, okay? So let's create a variable to check out. We're going to go here, and we're going to create a variable right above this area. Okay, so I'm going to say, and we're going to dim ourselves a variable called input. We can do something like my input. I want you to see how I do the camel casings first, and then it's an input. And then we want to say that input can only take strings. So it can only take strings. Okay, so now that we have our variable, we want to put something in that variable. According to our documentation here, or our UI, the person's going to put some information here, and then they're going to get an output. So we want to take whatever is inside of this txt message. We want to put it inside of this input. So when the person presses the button, and we already named this, remember, we want to take what's inside of this, which is called txt message, and we want to put it inside of this variable. So the first thing we do is my input, right? But we want to now say it equals the txt, and you notice Visual Studio starts to help you because it knows that you named that in front, message. But what about message we want to put inside of here? We can't just say message, because message is a text box, and message has a bunch of things connected to it. We got to say exactly what we want out of this message object. We want not this text area. We want the area that shows text inside of here. So that's going to be inside of the commons and then this text area. So we're going to want txt message dot text. So I'll say txt message dot text. It's already starting to help me. Dot text. So we're going to take the text inside of this message and put it inside of this variable. So now we can create our if statement. And our if statement is a conditional statement. We want to say if txt message, or if my input, because we're taking whatever's in message and putting it in an input. If my input is true, or whatever I say it true is, then go ahead and run this. If it's not that way, then it's going to run something else. And this is the thing you need to understand about the if statement. It's going to do one or the other. So if it's true, it will run this, but if that's not, it's going to do something else, right? So we will say if, we start that off with if, and then we put whatever the statement is here, then we write then, and then end if. Anything in between this will run if it's true. But we don't just want true here. We want to say if my input equals something like, let's say if the person puts in story, then we'll be able to write something out here, do something here. But what do we want to do? According to our UI, let's go back to the UI. According to our UI, we want to put something out in LBL output. Okay, so we will say LBL output dot text, because we want to put it in the text area, equals this is my story A. Okay, so whatever your story is, that's what you want to do with it. So now I'm gonna hit save, then I can go ahead and run that. Now watch what happens if I were to hit. Right now, if I put anything in there and I click enter, nothing will happen here. This will not change. But if I type story here and I click enter, there it is. There's my story, A. Now, if I type something else in there, it's not going to change. Okay. So let's really utilize our if statement. So right now, what's happening is when we click on it, if it's true that our input equals story, then it does something. If it's not true, we don't tell it to do anything. What if it's not true? We want it to say, sorry, wrong input. Then we can use what's called an if-else statement. If this is true, do this. And instead of the end if, we'll say else, like that, and then we'll do end if, like that. So now, if it does something, if it's true, it's going to do this. If it's true, it's going to do this. And now we have a C. If it's not true, then we're going to do this here. Sorry. No command for that. For that word, let's say, or action, whatever it might be. So I'm going to hit save on that, and then I'm going to run it again. So now, if I click it, it says, sorry, no command for that, sorry, no command for that word. We have an issue here. This is way too big. We're going to fix that. Let's just go ahead and test it while we're here. Story. I'm going to click enter if I can. I can't get to my enter. All right, so we have an error in UI development. So we're going to go back here and change this so it's much longer. And also, we don't need it that big, so I'm going to select this. I'll make sure I have that selected. I have it selected here. I can see that. I'm going to go to the text, and I'm going to change that to something like something reasonable. 48 should be good enough. Okay. And I don't need this right here because this is going to be my output. And in fact, this is just a command. We're going to use this for a command, so it doesn't have to be that big. And then we're going to change this one here because this is going to be our output. I'm going to just do something like that, and I can change this to 48. And then just in case, I can put this down a little bit further. Okay, hit Control S to save that. I'm going to run. Did we see any errors there beside that? No, we're fine. So I can now go ahead and hit run. Local machine, run, same thing. So now I'm going to type story. Enter, and there it is. This is my story. But what if I type something else? Sorry, no command for that. Blah, blah. Same thing. Story. And yes. Perfect. Go ahead and close that. So with everything set up that way, I can easily add a story here. And if I look at any requirements that I might have, a requirement there, I can add all my requirements here. I just hit enter there, and I can add my requirement number 4 there, my requirement number 5, whatever my requirements are for this application to work. Let's say if this application also had add variables, right? That's one thing, upload to Google Docs or whatever, or folder structure. And as I'm finishing this and as I complete all this, I can just remove the requirement. Boom, boom. Now all I just need to do is add text ideas to this, and I can add that inside of these quotes. All the requirements would be met. I have a variable, I have a conditional statement, and I have a user interface that actually works. This user interface using UWP allows you to create applications for Windows and phones, and websites, by the way, depending on the type of website that you're making. So it's pretty universal. The other thing you could do is if you have a long story you want to add here, a lot of times you don't want to just add a bunch of stuff here. If you hit enter, right now, you're going to want to be able to add all this inside of a variable instead of just typing this all here in case something needs to be changed. I can run this and still not have a problem. So I'm running it, and if I click whatever, you see all that junk there, right? So I can go ahead and close that, and I don't want all that stuff there. And I make sure it's closed with quotes. Now, this right here, this LBL output, this is where my story is going to go. This is my conditional statement. What I would rather do is put these in the variables. So I can go here and create another variable. Dim. My command. Let's say my command. And my command will equals story. It's going to equal this. Now we take my command and we replace it here. Now why would we do that? Well, because let's say if you had 1,000 lines of code, everywhere you would have this, you would have to replace it. But now, because I replaced it with this variable, anywhere this my command variable is, will present itself as this. So if I replace this to just S, everywhere this is will be replaced with S instead of me going down line by line by line of code, replacing it because I wrote it in there, which is not a good idea. It's not efficient at all because you may miss one. All right, so that means story. And we can then take our story and do the same thing. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to type dim my story equals the story. And then I can change this to my story. I can do the same thing with the output. That's a better output. LBL.text and my output actually says this, and we have these variables here, and we just replace it here. The application will work exactly the same. So now when I run it, you'll see it'll work exactly the same. We just made sure that all our text was up here instead of putting it deep into the code to where every time we need to use it, we got to go change the text itself. So if I click enter, you see nothing was in there. So it says, sorry, no command with that name. If I put story and enter, it shows my story.